what a great crowd we've got here. I think this is one of the most packed events I've been to anywhere. Just apologies if you hear some of the information twice, but I thought it's an opportunity, since this is my very first official engagement as a co-director of the Global Art Forum next year, just to update you a little bit about the Global Art Forum. So for those of you who don't know, the Global Art Forum is a series of live talks under curated theme, brings together participants, artists, curators, musicians, strategists, thinkers, writers. The next year's forum, which runs here in Dubai between the 18th and 21st of March, is under the theme of technologies and their impact on the world of arts and culture. The title of the Global Art Forum theme this year or next year is Download Update, أو بالعربي تحميل تحمين. We try to find a very tricky word that no one can pronounce. So the forum is, as Antonia said, co-directed by Turi Munt and yours truly, and our superstar hero, Shumon Bazar, who's a director at large and a total lifesaver, by the way. So we look forward to seeing you next year during the debates. This is day 0, and I'm very, very proud to be introducing, I think, one of the most influential people in the world of art today in general. I think a person who has made a mark despite his very, very young age. His bio is so long and deservedly long, not like my bio where some people go on and it's not worth all this. Omar is a writer and a curator and an editor. So he's currently the curator of the Whitechapel Gallery in London and a senior visiting curator at the Corner House and Home in Manchester. He is a senior editor at Ibraz Publishing, which is a great publication. If you guys follow it online, if you haven't, sign up for it. He headed previously the art and technologies at Space in London and was a director at the White Building. We can go on and on. Omar was an artistic director at the Arab British Centre in London and also was involved with the Arab Film Festival. In 2015, Omar will be curating the Pavilion for Cyprus at the 56th Venice Biennial and as Antonia just said, Abraj Group Art Prize during Art Dubai. He's released a number of books. I actually believe that there are several Omars out there because it's impossible that anyone can do all these things. His latest book is called Art After the Internet, which is the title of our talk today. One more thing, Omar is also curating the Armory Focus, which runs also in March, busy month next year, but earlier, fortunately for us, in New York. Now, going back to the talk today, I think I'd like to read a short excerpt from Omar's book. He says, much representation of the human relationship with technology in literature and cinema has tended to focus on the dystopian effects of hardware as opposed to software, the intangible sphere where so much of our lives have become increasingly mediated. Yet, it is undeniable that the intangible space of the internet has propelled the most significant cultural shift in the 21st century thus far. So, in the beginning of his book, Omar asks, could the internet allow artists as a means to jettison the formal structure of the institution? Can we ignore institutions? This is really the crux of the matter. Can we ignore institutions? Do artists need institutions? These are questions that we will be posing to Omar. Can the internet encourage a different kind of artistic expression? And I'm going to ask Omar as well, is the internet a space, a form, or an adjective? And I think I'll save some of the other questions for later, Omar, and I'll let you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sultan. And thank you to those who've been here with me in the afternoon also for our wonderful talk with my friend Joanna Hajitoma, who went on a beautiful journey, and some of the discussion that we had today might resurface this evening. Just to backtrack to that introduction very briefly, the reason I asked that question about whether the internet would enable artists the ability to jettison, as it were, institutions or institutional structures was because at the time I was running a year-long residency program at a space where I was running the first program there, and there were 13 artists in residency who engaged with technology in a different way, and there were all these urgent debates that were happening, and they started to say, you know, the space that we had was quite modest space in a developing area of London, and we started to, I suppose, live in a bit of a utopia, and to think that we weren't separate from any institutional structure, and that we were experimenting and tinkering in this space in a different way, which is where that question came from. And the actual book is a series of essays, conversations, and provocations that emerged from that time. And really, it was released about 6 months ago now. And in terms of answering that very first question, can the internet allow artists to jettison institutions? I think it most certainly can, because in a sense it enables a singular potential for any individual, any artist, to be able to engage directly with a public and the space to do so. However, on reflection, I think looking back at that time, was that actually the artists who were all together in this residency had actually formed a kind of institution, in a sense, by gathering together and working together under a formal structure. So, in a sense, reflecting back, I would say that there's perhaps a contradiction in that statement, in so much as that I don't know if we can ever truly escape the idea of an institution, perhaps. And that's just to reflect on that question. Your other question was...
The internet is a space or an adjective?
I think the internet, and I'm here talking about art and artists' relationship to the internet, and I worked for years as a curator at a technology center where we wrestled with these issues a lot, and truly, what I've come to see from an artist's perspective is that the internet is all of those things. It is a space. It is an adjective when used. It's a space to distribute work. It's an adjective when you choose to, in this particular moment, define works as being post-internet or internet-aware. And it's also a form. It's also material for artists to use and gather to use information, and also the actual structures of the internet actually become, in some cases, parts of artworks, per se. So it's all of those different things, in fact.
I'd like to ask you about one of the more popular essays, and a fantastic essay I read that features in Omar Khalif's latest book by James Bridle. James comes up with this new term, or maybe reuses this term, new aesthetic. And basically the new aesthetic is the increasing appearance of the visual language of digital technology and the internet in the physical world. The blending, if you will, of the virtual and the physical. That's how the internet has recently changed art. Is the new aesthetic even new? And hasn't technology been blended in the physical world for decades? And what makes the internet a different type of technology?
To answer that question, it's worth... James Bridle has been attributed with having coined this term, the new aesthetic, which has become very popular. And actually, what a lot of people forget was that it was simply a Tumblr blog where he was collecting images of things that he had seen. And within a number of weeks of him having started it, attracted over 100,000 followers. And that became kind of the beginning of this idea of the new aesthetic. I don't believe that necessarily that the idea of the new aesthetic is new, because in 2010, I edited a book tied to a show that I curated where Norman M. Klein, who is an urban historian based at CalArts, had said this statement, which in a way is very similar to what he's saying, and he says that the streets, that in a digital or post-digital world, that the streets begin to look like a computer desktop, but that computers themselves start to resemble architecture. And it's this idea that the intangible space of the desktop screen starts to resemble the physical world, because we're designing and developing things within this particular vocabulary or this particular visual language. And it's about that transference, if you will. What James did very intelligently was he was able to very succinctly analyze a huge mass of this visual language, which had existed for a number of years. But what's more interesting about this terminology was that he never meant it to be a manifesto of any sorts, but it was adopted and hailed in this very interesting way, whereby he became like a kind of messiah, whereby Wired magazine and numerous magazines were saying that he had coined this new term, and he actually was able to, for a time, make a living out of it, where marketing firms and branding organizations would say to him, how do we make our brand more new aesthetic? And in a way, it was quite interesting how he almost took something which was quite critical and, in a sense, intercepted a space that he wasn't really that keen to be a part of, and that kind of vocabulary is interesting as a reference, I think, but I don't think it's the way by which we should map how artists are working today necessarily.
And if I'm right, the image behind you is one of his images, one of his creations. Could you just tell us a little bit about this image before we go into your presentation?
Yeah, this is just a piece called Drone Shadow, where James has done a lot of research and been very obsessed with the idea of collecting drone data. And what he does in different sites is he visualizes drones in particular spaces. And there's this idea of taking things that may be seemingly invisible but may be audible and making them more visible, which in a sense is a part of what the discourse around the new aesthetic was about, was trying to make people aware of the digital infrastructure in which they physically occupied. So, should we go in? So I've got a few questions here. Sultan and we developed this kind of presentation together. What we'll do, I guess, we'll talk for some artist works and different examples and case studies, and there'll be room for questions at the end, of course. But maybe we go to this. And so the question here, Sultan, is what is the current state of things in terms of thinking of post-digital, post-internet? And by all of this, and also worth clarifying, when I mean art after the internet, I'm not saying that the internet is over. I'm talking about things that happen after the ubiquitousness of such a...
Because the internet could threaten established positions and jobs, and curators, and museums, and gallerists. So this is interesting to look at this from this point of view.
Exactly. So kind of the things to think about, kind of the infrastructure apparatus that this kind of defines or articulates. And one of the things that supposedly the internet has enabled is a democratization of the art world. In a sense, it becomes a funfair, a tourist attraction, and a commodity that is open to everybody to engage with, but at the same time, within that there are infrastructures for rarefied objects and rarefied positions, and for elites to continue to hold a particular degree of control. But within that, there is a continual obsession with the idea of the new, and that's why I think this idea of the new aesthetic becomes so popular, because within that there's a language that comes from marketing speak particularly, which is about trying to coin something particularly relevant, and that has happened in tandem with the obsession with very immediately contemporary things. So the rise of the biennial, the triennial, the quadrennial, the globetrotter who skips from their iPhone to the next biennial to the next art fair, from their desktop and email to from Dubai to London, etc. And what we see in that is also the reinvigoration of historical figures, marginalized figures coming back to the fore and being given space. And this idea is that it propels particular kinds of strategies, so particular kinds of language, such as Hans Ulrich Obrist's Project 89+, or Douglas Copeland coining terms such as the Diamond Generation. It's all part of this kind of broader ecology. And that, I think, is these are attributes of a culture that is increasingly hyperlinked, whereby when we read, we never necessarily read to the end of the sentence. We quickly click onto the hyperlink and dive into other and alternative worlds. And it's kind of endemic of a kind of global ADHD. And as someone who was diagnosed with ADHD as a child, I feel like it's quite fantastic that seemingly everyone around me also has ADHD, crossing the road with their phones, unable to leave their phones. Even my friend Sophia, who's always telling me to get off my phone today, couldn't even look up at Dubai. First time you've been in Dubai because you were on your phone. And so this begs a question, which is, does this context enable us to experience a visual culture?
And not only in the last few years, you've seen you've seen the start of virtual museums. You've seen virtual trips, virtual tours. So the internet is changing the landscape of how we're looking at art, and this has serious ramifications that I think haven't been understood until today.
Yeah, indeed, and I think the particular example that you give is a very useful one for us as we go through here, because one of the things that we've noticed is that artists are engaging with this space with these formal strategies, but institutions themselves have yet to be able to truly articulate and live purely online. So it's very rare that you find organization. We haven't seen the depth of the museum, for example. So since the millennium, we've seen museums grow. So Tate Modern is the most visited museum in the world, and this is a post-millennial, post-internet context. And I think what is interesting about the virtual sphere is to think about its potential and also its limitations, which is something maybe when we start to look at platforms, we could start to talk a little bit about here. Maybe should I talk a little bit about some artist works? Yes. Would that be interesting? So I'm going to show some projects, and I'll talk about them tangentially a little bit, but try and emphasize the point. Please, Sultan, jump in if you feel that I'm going too tangentially. But this was a project that I commissioned in 2013 called The Rave Lecture by Constant Dullart, and it's a lecture where Sultan is, Constant Sultan sounds similar, is actually talking about surveillance and the structures of surveillance that govern our everyday lives. But he thought no one's going to care about this really serious stuff, because no matter what we're told about privacy settings on apps or devices, we still can't give up, and I don't know, our attention to even read terms and conditions on iPhone apps is impossible. And so what he does is he devises a rave lecture whereby he takes thumping European dance tracks and encourages you to lose yourself through the psychedelic trip, while he's subconsciously and subversively telling you how you are being surveilled and watched while you let loose. And in a sense, is this idea of trying to make you as an individual incredibly hyper-conscious. Then we have artists like Ed Atkins, who we see working with a kind of visual animation and a visual iconography, which is very much, in terms of its form, definitely digital in terms of materiality. It looks and feels, when it's installed, like something digital. And this idea of a digital tactility or a kind of liquidity is something that we also see in the work of Hito Steral, who in this work here, she's actually enacting the insides of a MOV file, for example. And she's trying to visualize and embody the actual coded technology that occupies or that it creates the software and the files that we utilize. And it's this idea of both these artists that we start to see a visualization of things that aren't necessarily clear or tangible to us. Then we have a slightly more playful example here, and this is an artist called Jeremy Bailey, who his entire practice is formed around the idea of recreating historic or referencing historic museological conditions and augmenting them. So most of his work is a kind of virtual augmented reality. And here what he's done is he's created a series of historic portraits and paintings of everyday people, and he's sought to recreate the artifice or the characteristics of those paintings by using digital technology. And here there is...
He's employing the curator.
And here there is me recreating an 18th century painting, but being updated for the present day. I really love those pink earrings, whatever they are, the magenta. So here we have James Bridle, who you obviously mentioned, Sultan, and here... Last summer, he created what on the surface of things looked like just a balloon flying in the sky. But actually, it's not just any balloon. It's a surveillance military balloon that is used to surveil different communities and cities. And what he did actually is on the top of this car park, Bold Tendencies in Peckham, where you could see the entire city of London, he created this kind of makeshift, what you will maybe airbase, and he had this surveillance balloon flying up, and it would capture people's attention because they would be curious about what it was they were seeing. And inside, people would be able to see themselves surveilled. And then he would take this material and turn it into visual material and visual animations. And here, what he's referencing is he's taking the visual language of something that arguably is invisible, which is a language of surveillance, and visualizing it here in a very physical and public way. Another project which I want to talk about briefly is a project by Joanna Hajitoman and Khalil Juraij, which was first manifested here in Dubai at the Abraj Group Art Prize in 2011, 12. This is called A Letter Can Always Reach Its Destination. And this particular piece stemmed from research that the artist had started to do in 1999, where they were collecting spam emails, but not any spam emails, but emails that were scam emails, which were exactly so emails that encouraged viewers, readers, that proposed to them that they might be able to win a substantial amount of money if they would undertake a particular task. And this particular project manifested in this case as a series of figures who were reading out these emails, and they would step out of the screen in a hologrammatic form. And I believe it uses the Pepper's Ghost effect, which is a historic technique, and also it's, but also in the vein of all of Joanna and Khalil's work, which is very layered, it's also referencing a trope or tradition known as the Jerusalem letter, which is about scamming. And what's interesting about this particular project in terms of the discussion that I've had with Joanna and Khalil is that this is a work that's very much engaged with or taking its content from the internet per se, from emails, but actually as a work, it is very much a physical, very much a physical work. And Joanna would say this is not an internet work, but it's what we might call an internet-aware work, a work that is very much embedded within the broader social and political context of the internet and the flow of information that occurs there. And this is a part of that very same project as well, another project called The Rumor of the World, where a number of these narratives on, I think, 28 screens, 23 screens, you walk into the space and there's each of these particular narratives or scams are being read to you. And as you walk in, it's kind of a cacophony of all of these voices overlaid, which you can also read as a kind of allegory for the fact that the internet as a space is filled with so much material and content that it's often the individual becomes lost within that space. But then you zoom in or come into the individual character and you're able to hear through directional speaker that individual narrative and story very personally. Sorry if I'm going too many. We're almost on the artist, and we'll get to more questions. Likewise, Constant Dullard often uses the space of the internet as a one for inspiration. And actually, this project, which is quite complex, resulted in basically Constant taking the first photoshopped image ever produced, which was the founder of Photoshop's girlfriend, and it was called Jennifer in Paradise. And he actually took this image, which was the first photoshopped image, and sought to present it using every single Photoshop filter that was available to him on a standard Photoshop package that he could purchase. And he overlaid them over a large wallpaper of this. And what was interesting around this is that when Constant actually produced this as an installation, although the image had existed before, the actual wife, ex-wife of the founder of Photoshop came into the public sphere, questioning the copyright, as it were, of her identity in this image. And it's interesting to think about critically this space, is that as soon as, although things may seem seemingly free and open to everyone in this space, that once artists start to tinker and manipulate it, all sorts of questions around ownership start to arise. Another artist who's very dear to me, he's my favorite artist, is Ryan Trecarton, and he creates these hyper-realist videos, and a lot of people don't get his work because really what it's about is language, the language that we speak online in fragments through YouTube clip, through Facebook message, through WhatsApp, etc. And the piecemeal nature in which that language, and schizophrenic and confessional nature of that language. And he creates a visual language to match that, where he's layering together numerous different pieces of digital visual references. And the way that he presents this is that all these works are freely available online, which is interesting, of course. However, what Ryan will always say is that those works that are online aren't the actual works, because for him, the computer screen with its YouTube screen with its 16 by 9 frame is limiting or takes away from that artwork.
Does he make another version that's offline?
What he does is he creates spatial environments for these works to be staged. So there will be almost like 3D environments, playgrounds, where you'll have 7-channel sound, for example, where you will walk and hear voices behind you and underneath you, and you'll start to see images transposed all around you. He creates an architecture. And it's an interesting thing to think about how artists who apparently are native or very particular to this sphere still see that their work when it's online is not necessarily the authentic or art object, as it were. These are 2 series of images by an artist called Trevor Paglen, who also has a PhD in geography. And what they are images of the National Security Agency, and
which last year in the last few months has fallen into has come out in the news for spying on not only Americans but also world leaders.
Exactly. It's a wonderful thing, isn't it, sometimes? And what he was interested in was the idea that there was no visual vocabulary for the NSA. It was this invisible evil entity. And he thought, well, what I want to do is photograph it.
Was it illegal? Was he breaking any laws by photographing it?
Not that I'm aware of. I had conversations with him, and I don't think that there's anything untoward in terms of what he was doing. He was also a cinematographer on Laura Poitras's recent film about Edward Snowden, Citizen 4. And what was interesting for reading this work is it's not just the photograph that's the work, it's the fact that after he took these photographs, he made them freely available online under a Creative Commons license. So within literally weeks of them being released online, hundreds of thousands of people downloaded these images. And that in itself, that idea of the distribution is part of that artwork, because the enabling of people to catalyze and adopt that work is what makes that the work that it is. And I think that's a particular point that I wanted to mention here when we're talking about the internet as a space of form or an adjective, is this is one of the particular strategies that artists can use, is that it's not simply that the object that speaks to a work's value as an artwork, but also the mechanism by which it circulates. This map and this foam sculpture, which looks at sound, like a soundscape, is a project by Lawrence Abu Hamdan called The Freedom of Speech Itself. And what he was doing here was he became very fascinated by our belief and our reliance on technology and how states are able to use technology to particular aims without ever being questioned. And what he found out was that in the UK, when particular individuals would go to the UK seek asylum, that they would be asked to perform an accent test. And that accent would validate whoever that person was really from where they were saying they were from. And he does a very beautiful performance where he reenacts this character, this Palestinian refugee, who the way he pronounces tomato fails him. So the machine says, well, the way you're pronouncing tomato suggests that you're not really from where you say you are, so unfortunately we won't be able to grant you asylum. And so what Lawrence's work does is it seeks to visualize these things through graphs, through performance, through sculpture. And what the formal mechanisms actually reveal is a critical questioning of our reliance and our subservience to technology. And the last artist I want to talk about here is Maha Ma'moon, and this is a piece called The Night Visitor. And what this is a film that is pieced together from footage taken by everyday individuals, put on YouTube, in the State Security Building in downtown in Tahrir Square after the revolution. And she pieces together this 10-minute film, and she puts it back online. And this is another way where artists are commonly using the space of the internet through appropriation. So in terms of this idea of, for example, how do we experience art online, or how do we collectivize an experience? One of the things that artists are doing is taking individual narratives and creating an idea of a collective narrative, as it were. And that's something, again, that I think is a possibility that has been enabled by this space.
Thank you. Maha Ma'moon, the last artist that was shown, was part of the one of the artists who showed at the new museum at the first exhibition of Middle Eastern art in New York just last summer. Tell us a little bit about this work. This is an image that some of you might be familiar with. Some famous U.S. rapper came up with this icon. I think you can recognize him.
He's our friend, will.i.am.
So, what's this about?
I was, I told you this, Sultan. I was very disenchanted when, were you with me when we went to the show? When we were told that there was this amazing show happening at the Barbican called Digital Revolution. And it was going to tell us how the internet had changed art. And this is the kind of stuff that we saw. And I thought it was, what was interesting about it was that it was commodifiable names. It was high production value aesthetic. There was very little art involved, and there was this kind of question about whether the work on display was work by the creative industry or by artists. And the thing that really struck me was why the word revolution. And that for me is something about the world we live in. Is we're obsessed in some ways with using the word revolution in relation to the digital context and the internet context, which I think is problematic because really art isn't necessarily tasked with being revolutionary per se. And I wonder why artists should be expected, or why artists are being put into this or instrumentalized in this narrative that is very similar to how you would brand a new TV set or how you would brand any kind of product. And that was my frustration with this particular project. And I guess what's more interesting, I think, is actually not so much that artists are revolutionizing, but that artists maybe are using things counterintuitively to the form, that they are exploring different strategies. But I don't think that it's necessarily revolutionary per se.
If I may ask, you use the term internet native. So what is the cutoff date for an internet native? What is there a year, or could someone who is 50 be an internet native?
Probably not.
Probably not.
You know, the thing about this is, I was very curious by this idea, 89 plus or the diamond generation, or
who are 25 years now.
Yeah, and
anyone born in 1989 here? Yeah, we've got a
great. We should.
They're natives.
You're native.
You're
guys.
natives. Tell us all about your world.
But I think that's problematic, that terminology, because it's also based on class and social structure and stratosphere and where you live in the world. And perhaps if you were born in 87 in a particular context versus 89 in a particular context, you may have had access to digital tools on the internet previously. I use the term native in a tongue-in-cheek kind of way. You know, I make fun of it because for me, native now, for me, as in terms of an artistic, I'm not talking about it in beyond, from an artistic kind of perspective, is someone who intuitively always references the digital condition in their work in some way. So, for example, someone who makes paintings that reference or are aware of the context of the internet, for example, for me is in a sense an internet or digital native. And this idea of, for example, post-internet is often, I choose to use the language or the terminology internet aware as opposed to that, because I think it's more appropriate is that it's suggesting that it's individuals or people who are aware of the social, political, and economic context that govern the structures of the internet.
I want to ask another question. There are several internets. There's high speed broadband. There's low speed. So does this affect? Does this change your level of nativity to the internet? As an artist, say that you cannot upload. Let's talk about some countries in the Middle East that have, and you know which one I have in mind, on the small country on the Mediterranean bordering Syria. So, you know, the artists there suffer. You know, they cannot upload, you know, the YouTube videos or short movies that they make. So, are there several internets?
There are actually several internets, which is slightly different to what you're saying, which is here, in some of these definitions here. But in terms of the idea of, for example, slow internet, Beirut internet, for example, which is a fantastic experience for anyone who makes films or wants to upload stuff. God. I don't think that the speed of your connection dictates whether you are a native or intuitive internet user. I think it's just certainly what it does do is it affects the utopic or creative potential of distribution that, for example, the internet enables, which is that any individual can share their work throughout a global network is only true to particular individuals who have that access. Having said that, the ubiquity of high-speed internet is increasingly taking over the world, the entire context. And so artists, for example, in Afghanistan and Latin America can, for example, take part in forums, the very same forums, because of their ability to use the internet. And this is something that I myself experience because I work with artists from all those contexts, and one of the only ways that we can communicate is using this space to share content and share information. But there are other kinds of internet. So, for example, private peer-to-peer networks or closed networks, for example, which is something that artists use. So Constant Dullard, who's the artist that I mentioned here, often sets up a private network for particular individuals in particular spaces and stages a performance on your mobile phone, for example. And that becomes a different kind of internet because it's not the ubiquitous, it's not the democratic internet for all where everyone can have access to the same things. It's a private internet for a select and invited number of individuals. And in that respect, you could say that this is reinforcing a hierarchy of concealing or closing off of a particular space, as it were. Here I was talking a little bit about millennial shifts, which maybe aren't so relevant to talk about now, but definitely one of the things that I'm interested in is the platforms and how we curate online and how we curate in digital space. And I think that this is something that you're going to be engaging with in the Global Art Forum in terms of how you think about institutions and how institutions exist online. And there are a few things that I have here mentioned. One of them that's really interesting to me is the idea of algorithmic curating. So check this, right? If I put a Ryan Trecarton catalog in my Amazon basket.
The guy who from the NSA?
No, the guy from the videos, the Hyperrealist videos.
Oh, Hyperrealist, okay.
I will then get links to books by catalogs of Seth Price. I'll get links to books about Jean-Luc Godard. I will get links to films like Social Network and films about surveillance culture on the internet. I will get art historical texts. And the hungry Omar Khalif, who has this ADHD, who wants to click on everything and buy everything, buys it all. And say I never went to art school or I never would study art history. I have just there been able to, within a very intuitive, I suppose, series of clicks, educate myself in an entire history of art that would have taken me years to experience through a library structure where I had to look at a text and see a reference there and then go back there and go here.
And these are algorithms that social media companies pay millions of dollars for. So these are smart ways that identify your clicks and your uses of the internet and then suggests either friends or suggests to you books that you're interested in or artists that you're interested in. On Facebook, I'm sure if you've liked some artist, then it suggests other artists that are similar to that. They wouldn't suggest, for example, classical art or art from hundreds of years ago. They would suggest artists that are also contemporary. So these algorithms are worth millions of dollars for whoever develops them, and they are secrets. They are like the recipes of McDonald's for Facebook and Google and Twitter and all these.
It's interesting because you can read this in two ways, right? You can read it as, this is fantastic. It allows you to cut through a lot of stuff and get to from A to Z very quickly. But you also have to question what falls out of the limits of that algorithm. So what is it that I'm not able to see? And what about the rare books or the rare artists or the people who are marginalized, or how do they fit into that narrative? But sometimes it works. Sometimes it takes you on a journey. And
I was going to say that you risk through these algorithms. You risk being a learned ignoramus. You risk being a person who knows a lot, but about one thing, about one specific kind of art, and then you miss out on everything else around you because this algorithm is so present.
But what it's done is it's created the kind of the rise of the autodidact. So the idea that so many individuals are self-taught, it's part of this utopia of, a digital and post-digital condition is this idea that you can teach yourself anything and do anything. And what we see increasingly is people come into the field of practice of art and other practices through these structures. And I think it's an interesting point to meditate on because it's definitely something that is, I think, yes, you can be being a learned ignoramus is still better than being a complete ignoramus, basically. Should we talk about platforms? So, I'm trying to think what we should talk about. So, you asked me earlier today about experiencing art online. And what do you, before I go into this, what do you think about experiencing art online? Well,
it's a two-edged sword. So experiencing art online is both a positive and a negative thing. There is a value to, if you imagine trying to go to the Louvre today and trying to see the Mona Lisa. It's a chore. In fact, you won't be able to. You'll only be seeing the backs of the screens of mobile phones and people's heads. And then there's two screens and a barrier between you and the artwork. Are you really experiencing the Mona Lisa? Are you better off seeing the Mona Lisa online than you are in the real world? On the other hand, for me, nothing beats going to a museum, because when you have that intimate relationship with that artwork that is uncensored, that's unfiltered, that is truly a special experience. And the other thing that I feel about experiencing work online is that it's a solitary experience. So you cannot take your family and your girlfriend or your boyfriend or whoever and take them and experience an artwork together and explain it, because it's such a solitary, individualistic relationship. There's so much to say. I really haven't fallen on one side or the other, but I'm curious to know what you think, because there's a lot going on in the Middle East in terms of online art, which we can talk about.
I mean, I think there's something interesting about democratizing something. A painter might do it, even an image, a reproduction of what a painter could do in Syria, and being able to exhibit it to a mass audience, or vice versa.
Or Gaza.
And how many artists, like Tarzan Arab, who you can be landlocked, and your material, your work can traverse national borders and a particular police structure. But also, I want to maybe contradict this idea of being alone. When I was with Doug Copeland, we were in the Ace Hotel, which is, London, this hipster hotel, and we were preparing for a talk, and everyone was on their laptops, but everyone was... It's this weird thing where everyone gathers to be on their laptops together, and they want to be together, and it's so noisy, and it smells of all kinds of food, and what's interesting is, he said, we're all alone, but we're together. And in a way, maybe what we're going into is a stage in our lives where we appreciate being with other people, but we also like to take our individualized user journeys. I mean, how many times do you go shopping with your partner and you want to go and experience and go into another aisle and leave them, but you want to be with them? Or how many times do you go to a museum and they want to see the Matisse and you want to see the conflict photography show? And in a way, what this allows is potentially is that you can be alone, but you can also be together in so much as you can take your portable device or this space, this work, and be with someone and show it to them, and be with them, but still navigate and create your own journey. And I think there's something quite romantic about that. So in a way, the pessimism about, internet is so, in terms of the experience of art, is so isolationist, for me is one that I think we should challenge, because in a way, I think what it enables is slightly more interesting than what it disables, for example. But there's something else that you talked to me, or you just mentioned earlier, is the idea of aura, or the idea of the physical, material, and bodily qualities of an artwork, which I think we should talk about. So for you, experiencing a painting, experiencing the Mona Lisa in real life is not the same as experiencing it on this phone.
Tiny screen with a mustache. Does she have a mustache? I can't see.
She does have a mustache.
Doesn't have a mustache in real life, by the way, for those.
I think we should ask the question about... We should ask that question. I think, of course, we see the craft, we see the precision, we see the artist's hand. But I think we're also quite romantic about the real work of art as well, because how many artists have massive studios and have assistants make their work for them, and how many things are mass-produced that we rarefy, and how different is it, how interesting is it that we can zoom in on details here that we can't with the human eye, for example. These are all questions that I'm always asking myself in terms of the possibility. But what we haven't talked about yet is money.
I was going to say, one of the slides that Omar had is artsy. There's a huge market that was created because of the internet. Because of the internet, people and artists around the world, whether they were in conflict zones, if you think of the last Palestine conflict, there was a popular artist who put up images, and now I think they want to invite him, but can he leave is a different story. Allowing access to individuals who can't sell to galleries or are unable to reach these galleries. Think of all these female Saudi artists or artists in the Gulf who use Instagram, for example. It's a very popular platform in the region. So it has opened up a huge market for artists. I'd like to know what you've seen.
I mean, I think that I should tell you guys my experience of Artsy, actually, which is so funny. So, Artsy.net, I was invited to be part of... I haven't used it recently, okay? So I used it when it first launched, and I was invited... I don't know if it's because I'm special or anything, but I was invited to sign up and test drive it. I was so excited about this thing. And I went in, and I saw a painting by an artist that was worth $9,000, and it said, buy now. I thought, fantastic. Amazon, click happy mentality in this virtual space. This is amazing. This is the future. I can just buy art. I don't have to talk to galleries. I don't have to be tested. I don't have to be told by someone that I'm not serious about an artwork. I can just buy it. And I don't have $9,000 to spend, but I thought I'm going to try and buy it and see what happens. You know, will the debt collectors come and get me if I don't pay the $9,000? I don't know, but I tried. What was interesting to me about Artsy was that I got an email automatically saying, "Thank you for your interest in this painting or this drawing." I can't remember. I think it was a painted print, but it wasn't an original. What interested you in this?
So now they're asking you questions.
I was enraged. I was so angry. What is the point in mirroring the infrastructure of a digital platform such as Amazon and not allowing me the luxury to just buy it? So I ignored it, I trashed it, and I thought, whatever, this is utter crap. And then I got another email saying, "Dear Omar, I'm not sure if you got my email. Do you want to talk more about this?" And ultimately, what frustrated me about this experience was that it was simply mirroring real-world conditions from which you acquire art. It was simply, all that it was simply another platform, another mechanism from which, or by which you could buy art. And actually, if you dig deeper into the context of Artsy, you'll start to realize that the curatorial content is very much driven by museums and institutions. Their advisors are all from veritable, bona fide blue chip organizations, whether it's the British Museum, the Tate, the MoMA. And even the way that you experience work when you want to have it simulated for you is on the standard museum bench, on a museum-looking floor and a museum-looking wall, which to me was, again, this reinforcing of the idea of the institution, when obviously in my house, most people don't have a wall that looks like that in their home. So what's the point in simulating it in that particular way? So in terms of its possibility, I think that it is not as vanguard as it claims to be because it's simply reinforcing a structure. However, what was different and what I was more curious about was this thing called sedition, which was started by Harry Blaine, I think is his name, from Blaine Sovereign. And the idea behind this was, when they launched, was they said, you know, we can't all afford this Tracy Emin neon. I don't know, I can. But why don't we make only maybe 800, 1,000 of these and make them downloadable as digital JPEGs that you could download.
And these are unique JPEGs. These are JPEGs that are numbered, and you own a specific number.
Exactly. And you can take that JPEG and put it in your home and say that I have a Tracy Emin. And you can also have it on your phone. And you can also like hang out with it here. And what, for me, I've tested,
But how is that different than print?
well, it's not really, in so much as that, that's why I was kind of going back and saying, are we overemphasizing the value and nature of a rarefied object because it's, or saying that something is rarefied because it's physical? Because I bought an artwork from, I thought I bought an artwork the other day from an artist, a print, an edition of 20 from his gallery, and he came and saw it at my house and said, "Oh, I've never seen that." And it's because he made a file, you know, took an image, he has the original, he gave it to his gallery as a charity edition, and she produced it. He didn't even manage the print quality. But what's different, though, is that there is something immaterial about this. But ignore all of that. What I'm interested in is this idea of how we attribute value. So I say this also in the book, is it the form of the art world that makes the art world, or is it something about the aura of the art object? So what if I, for example, download 30 of these from YBA artists, and I put 30 plasma screen TVs in my living room, and I put a red carpet out there, I get Moët Chandon to sponsor, because I'm friends with the CEO for some reason. I do goodie bags and my mother has made something to put in them. And I invite the press and the art world. Is that a show of YBA art, or is it a facsimile of a show? Or is it a joke? Or is it, that's what I'm interested in, is how do we attribute value, or how do we seriously and critically engage with these things, is something that I'm not entirely sure. Having experienced a JPEG of these, I wasn't so excited, but I don't know if other people have felt differently, or if they feel excited about the prospect of downloading one of these 5,000 editions of these Tracy Emin's or Bill Viola's. What do you think?
You called it democratizing art.
That's what they say also. They say that it's democratizing art, and they also say that it's enabling the layperson, so enabling any artist to be able to say, I can sell my work online, and my work is as readily available as Tracy Emin's, and you're all on the same platform. But here's the catch. So they invited me to become, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, I think I have a confidentiality.
Some other platform invited you. Some other platform invited somebody else to do something.
But ultimately, what transpired, I had an experience with them. I was invited to become a curator of this platform and actually realized that it wasn't really curatorial per se. And what I realized is that these works only actually ever sell if they're tied to a real-world event or an institution that validates them. So they sell most of these editions when they do a pop-up event or a pop-up exhibition, such as when I was in New York at iBeam and they had a sedition exhibition where you could see all of the stuff. And it was only when the institution validated it that it became something that people wanted to own. And what that does is it goes back to my first point, which is can the internet allow artists to jettison the formal structures of institutions? Mm-hmm. Maybe not, because ultimately, is it the institution that governs and enables art with its value? It's a question. I don't have the answer. I won't talk about online auction houses or Curate Award or Where to From Here.
We'll get there.
Or what? I mean, this sums up just all that I've said, Sultan.
Well done.
So I say, what will the art world look like for artists in the future? It's confusing, isn't it?
I think you cleared it up a little bit for us, so it's a bit clearer for us, I think, thanks to Omar Khalif. We'll open up to questions in a bit, but I'd like to bring this discussion back to the region. Omar is a global curator. He's based in London, but we're based in the Middle East, so we get to ask Middle Eastern questions if we want. There is a large number of people here who use the internet to promote their work, to promote their identity, to promote their presence online. And one of the most interesting experiments that's going on today in the world, I think for me, is the Palestine Virtual Museum. The Palestine Museum is a museum that's being built in Ramallah, hopefully with the aim of opening in 2016. However, there is a virtual museum online. And there's a lot of art that's being uploaded on that museum as well, including photography, including paintings. And this is, to my knowledge, the first time that you're building a national museum, a museum that tells the story of a nation for a nation that doesn't officially exist yet. So if you try to wrap your mind around that you're telling the story, and I interviewed Jack Persikian, and he said an interesting point, because I asked him in the interview, I said, which Palestine are you telling the story of? The Palestine of Ramallah, the Palestine of Gaza, the Palestine of inside 1948? There are so many Palestines out there. Which Palestine is it? And he said, I'm telling the story of multiple identities. Not an identity, not the Palestinian identity, but Palestinian identities. And I'd like to ask you about virtual museums, but the museums that, especially today, when you look at the Middle East today, the landscape is quite quite sad. A lot of art is being destroyed. A lot of culture and thousands of artifacts that date back millennia are being destroyed because of war. Are we saving them by uploading them?
It's I mean, I'm Egyptian, and so when you know, when like a revolution happens and the Egyptian museum gets looted, and if you told me that you'd uploaded a JPEG, a photo of it, that have you saved it, I would say no, because no. But that might be a very particular experience for me, because I remember experiencing that museum growing up, and it's a different context. I think what's more interesting maybe in that context is how you fashion a sense of shared or identity in a global context using the space of the internet, by articulating a potential kind of vision, by articulating a journey, a story through artworks. But I don't necessarily think that simply by archiving them in that space that you are saving them or rescuing them or enabling them to be preserved. But I do think on a more kind of metaphoric level, it does enable a particular kind of identity to exist.